And so next we have the clinicians who are going to come up and have a roundtable discussion. I'd like to introduce Dr. Donald Felsenstein, Associate Professor of Medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital and at the Harvard Medical School. She's a senior attending an infectious disease unit at MGH. She cares for a number of ME/CFS patients, and she was talking about ones that she's seen for nearly 30 years yesterday. And so we also have Dr. Anthony Komaroff, Distinguished Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School, 15 years as the Director of General Medicine and Primary Care at the Brigham Women's Hospital, and is obviously been an important pioneer for ME/CFS, especially in the areas of definition and epidemiology. So he's obviously a very valuable part of this collaboration. And Dr. Amel Kara, who is an Associate Professor of Pediatrics at the MGH and Harvard Medical School, specialty in medical genetics, and works with ME/CFS patients and mitochondrial genomics specialty.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here despite the nice weather outside. So we would like the session to be very interactive. So what we're going to be doing is telling you a little bit about ourselves and why we are here today, and then take some questions from you, if that's okay with you. So we'll be sharing this microphone. Tall chairs. So I'll start. As you heard, I'm an internist and a clinical geneticist by training. And I specialize in rare diseases, and more specifically mitochondrial disease. And through that, I have seen patients, or patients have been referred to me when they have chronic fatigue, to make sure that they don't have other rare conditions, especially a mitochondrial problem, that might explain why they are feeling tired. So I'm kind of the next step after they see Tony and Donna. They get to me if there's something atypical about their presentation, or if there's a family history that is suggestive of something more than just ME/CFS. And what I do is I try to dig a little bit deeper to see whether there are any other genetic conditions that are contributing to the symptoms. So that's how I came to be aware of ME/CFS, and I was very struck by the disability that it causes patients and their families, and I tried to learn more about it. And as you dig deeper, you just can't help but get more involved, because I feel that there's a huge gap in our medical system taking care of these patients, taking care of you. And I'm here because I want some solutions and things to move forward. And so, Tony, can you tell us a little bit how you came to be part of the ME/CFS community?
I was fairly junior on the faculty and had a practice of general internal medicine. And in the late 1970s, I'm dating myself, a patient came into my practice who had classic acute infectious mononucleosis, but that was a year and a half before. And he said, I've never really gotten over that mononucleosis. Well, that's not what I'd been taught. That's not what the textbooks said. They said that mononucleosis may debilitate people even for a few months, but a year and a half later, that doesn't happen. But according to this patient, it did happen, and it happened to him. And I tried to study him with some colleagues who were experts on the virus, Epstein-Barr virus, that causes mono, most cases of mono. Couldn't interest them, and I let it drop. But then about 7 or 8 years later, by chance, several other people came into my practice with essentially the same problem. It hadn't begun with mononucleosis, but it had begun with some sort of flu or infectious-like illness from which they had not recovered, and now it was many months, in fact, in 2 cases, several years later. So that got me interested in studying it. And about that same time, people at the NIH down in Atlanta, at CDC, and in Colorado also were beginning to see patients with a similar story. I heard about them, they heard about me, and we began to collaborate to try to better understand the illness.
Great. And Donna, can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Thank you. First of all, thank you all for coming today. It's absolutely my pleasure to be here and to see this group that has gotten together to try to work together to find a solution to this problem that is so badly needed for so many people around the world and in this country. My story is similar to Tony's. I was trained in infectious disease. I was coming out of my fellowship. I don't remember exactly what year it was. It was just a few years later. It's probably in the early 80s when I had a similar experience where I sat down to see a patient who had come to me for some illness that she had had. And as an infectious disease person, you start to think of what are the possibilities. It was always, what is the differential that this might be? And after speaking to this woman who came in and she was telling me how she was fatigued, how her muscles hurt, how her head was foggy, that she couldn't think clearly, she was unable to do her work, she was unable to stay at her job full time anymore, and her life had basically fallen apart. And after we spent quite a bit of time together, I looked at her and I said to her, I'm not exactly sure what you have right now. I know I don't know what this is. There's no question that you've been infected with something. This is an infection, and that you're very ill, and will do my best to try to figure out what to do to help you. And the first thing she did, I said this yesterday at our meeting, where she burst into tears and she started to cry. And she said, I am so happy. You are the first doctor who believed me. And it was that sentence that still gets to me and still is so important, because unfortunately so many of my patients that I've seen over the years have basically been told that they're depressed, that they're malingerers, that it's in their head, and that they should just move on with their life. And that's wrong. And that is something that the medical community, fortunately, as you can see by the symposium we had yesterday and by the turnout today, fortunately, the medical community has recognized that this is a real illness. I, as an infectious disease doctor, still think there are many possible etiologies. I still hold on to the fact that it is an infection, or maybe very many different infections. But the good news is that we are all here today, and that we don't believe that it's in anyone's head. We know this is a real disease, and we are committed to try to do something effective to try to get to a solution. Like we have over my career, not me personally, but I've seen Legionnaires, we've seen chlamydia, we've seen herpes, we've seen HIV. The medical community has come up with solutions for these infections. And my hope is that in the not too distant future, now with the new technology that is available, which was not available 30 years ago, we will hopefully come up with an answer in the not too distant future. And thank you to my patients. Thank you to my patients, some of whom are here today, for allowing me to work with you and to participate in your care and to trust me with you and to be able to work with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Donna. I have to say that every time you send me a patient, it's always a pleasure to read your note, because I don't think there are many doctors who still write notes like you and I do. It's very, very thorough. She goes all the way back. And she asks everything about where they were born and where they grew up and what they were exposed to and how many pets they have. It's really good. And I think that that's what's really missing from the medical community, is that for chronic fatigue syndrome, we need to take the time and listen to your problems and listen to you, so we can come to the right conclusion and to the right diagnosis. And I think, given the state of the healthcare right now, and how time is a very expensive commodity for doctors, most of the people don't always have the luxury to spend that much time. And I thank Donna for putting the time and all this effort into trying to listen and carefully think about. And Tony as well, who has done this for many, many years, 40 years now. He's unfortunately semi-retired now, but he has been a trailblazer for this disease, and we thank him for that as well. And Tony, having been through this for the last 40 years, can you tell us a little bit how you approached the patient back then and how things evolved over time for you in terms of seeing patients in the clinic? How do you approach them? What do you do for them? How do you come up with a diagnosis?
Well, when I began, there was really no name for the illness, and there was no case definition. So there was no, you just had, you were swimming blind. But nevertheless, the main point was you were dealing with someone who was suffering. And I have to say, one of the things that got me interested was the fact that so many people had been told that there's nothing wrong with you by colleagues of mine when it was clear to me that there was something wrong. And that got me mad because, you know, why does that happen? You're a doctor. What are you supposed to do? Person comes to you suffering. You're supposed to figure out the cause of the symptoms and give the right treatment. And if someone comes to you with something that you've never read about in the textbooks, you've never heard about in medical school, you feel, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do the two things that the person in the chair next to me wants me to do. And I'm afraid, this may sound harsh, but I'm afraid some of our colleagues in that moment say to themselves, I don't know how to diagnose or treat this patient's symptoms, and that's a problem for me because I'm supposed to be able to do that. So instead of making it a problem for me, I'll make it a problem for the patient. And I'll say it's really nothing, it's in your head. And that is something that happens not just in medicine, and it's called blame the victim. And it's really unacceptable professional behavior, but it actually happens a fair amount in dealing with patients with this illness, and that got me mad. Now, what do I do when someone has the story? First, I just ask them to tell me from the beginning what it was like, how it began, how it has evolved, because with this illness, the symptoms people experience often change over time. I've tried to find out how badly it has affected their life at home, their life at work, their life with their friends, and try to get a reading on what the symptoms are, how debilitated the person is. And I think about that since so many illnesses cause fatigue, I try to think about all of the different illnesses that might be causing this person's fatigue, and do what I can to rule out those illnesses where we do have diagnostic tests to allow you to rule them out. But then at the end of that quest, you are left with a person who doesn't have all of those other diseases that can cause fatigue, and since 1988 at least, meets a case definition for the illness. Initially, I tried a whole variety of different treatments since there was absolutely nothing written anywhere about what treatments might work. Some things did seem to help, and some things didn't. So it was trial and error at the beginning, but as there were more and more people throughout the country, doctors throughout the country, and ultimately around the world, caring for similar patients, we did a lot of talking to each other, trying to figure out, to learn from each other how to better help people. But always frustrating because we don't yet have fundamental answers to this illness.
How about you, Donna?
very similar to Tony, and I think that's why I love working with Tony, was because I think we have the same outlook on this problem. So my patients, and as I said, some of you are here, you'll know that when I do an initial evaluation, we go through a fair amount of testing. As I said, I'm trained in infectious disease. My mentor, Dr. Morton Swartz, was a very brilliant man, and basically taught me to go through a differential diagnosis, which is still the exercise that I do go through as I listen to the stories from my patients. And as Tony said, they're different. Each person is a little different. My fear is that I'm always going to miss something that can be treated. And so and once I give the person the diagnosis of chronic fatigue, very few people are going to start to look for some other cause. So before I give that person the diagnosis, because it remains a diagnosis of exclusion, which means although we do have a case definition, we do want to make sure that we've ruled everything else out. So I will try to go through, is it a connective tissue problem? Is it a different infection like Lyme disease, which can actually mimic this in so many ways? Could it be myasthenia gravis, which is a neurological problem? There are just so many different things. And I will go through that list. When I've come to the list and I still think there's something funny that I'm not sure could be metabolic, I send them over to Abel and I ask for her help. But we do a fair amount of blood work to try to rule out what I can rule out, until, again, we do have a diagnostic test for this illness. And that is what I'm still waiting for. Is that?
Yes, and by the time the patients come to see me, they've already had a very thorough workup in general, and they have seen on average 8 to 10 subspecialists, the rheumatologist, the ID doctor, the immunologist, the neurologist, and they've had a lot of tests done. So I think that some of my job is really to go over all the tests that have been done and making sure that nothing has been misinterpreted or disregarded as, oh, this is nothing, or so reviewing all of that and going back, as Tony said, taking a very thorough history from birth. I actually start way before when the mothers were pregnant, and I'm really grateful when the parents come with the patient, because I can ask them directly questions about the conception and the pregnancy and the delivery and all of that. A lot of the genetic conditions that I deal with can present in childhood, and there may be sometimes hints that can be picked up on history taking. And then if I think, I also take a long time gathering a family history. And as a geneticist, we need to get a 3-generational family history, so that takes up a lot of time. I'm usually on the phone with an aunt or an uncle or the grandmother and the mother trying to gather that information. So after I look at the family history, the history of the patient, all the testing that have been done, if I think that there is a chance that there might be an underlying metabolic condition or genetic condition, I do move forward and do genetic testing. I have to say though, for the ME CFS cases in general, I don't find much. And I think for a lot of people who don't deal with this, with you guys, with this population of patients, fatigue might seem the same. If someone says they are fatigued, everyone assumes that it's the same fatigue, and only with experience and talking to a lot of patients that you start to figure out that this fatigue is very different from all the other fatigues. And what I tell the patient is a lot of the genetic conditions that I deal with have fatigue associated to it. But the ME CFS fatigue is another league of fatigue. And so it's really, really important to take a thorough history and really talk about the type of fatigue, when it starts, how it evolves during the day, what triggers it, what makes it better, what doesn't make it better, to be able to come to a diagnosis. I think I would like to talk a little bit about the challenges that we face, because we do see the gap in our medical system and in our clinics, and we do see more and more patients trying to make appointments with us. And unfortunately, we can only do so much because we have limited slots available, and we do face a lot of challenges in our clinic trying to accommodate everyone. So Donna, can you tell me a little bit about the challenges that you do face in your clinic?
cloning is available, and I sometimes say to my staff, not really joking, can you clone me? Because I need several others of me, basically, to try to accomplish what I need to accomplish for the people who need help. So far I haven't seen a twin sister or anything else like that. So the challenge is really the number of hours in the day and the number of people that need help. And I think what needs to happen is we need to get more clinical people as well as researchers involved in this, interested, realizing it is a real illness, that they need to look at this illness in the same way that HIV, when we did HIV back in the 70s, when there were very few physicians who wanted to go near HIV and help the patients. But over time, people had come to understand the illness, understand that they needed to really embrace it and wrap their hands around it, and then move forward. That hasn't happened with ME/CFS. And I think we need to do that. So if there are people here who do marketing, who do branding, who do PR, I mean, I think this is something that, in the same way that HIV became something that the entire community knew and began to understand, I think we need to do the same for ME/CFS. And that needs to happen. It needs to happen quickly. We need to teach it in the medical schools, and we need to teach it in the hospitals to the fellows as well, and get more hands, because unfortunately they haven't cloned me or Tony or Mel yet. So that's the biggest challenge. The other challenge is obviously the supportive help in the hospital, the nurses, the administrative staff, who then would help the clinicians try to help all of our patients.
So Tony, you've been doing this the longest. If you had a wish list, what would it be, and what challenges would you tackle?
I would wish for a definitive diagnostic test. That would simplify a lot of things. And of course, I would wish for an effective treatment that was certified effective. I think there are effective treatments, and we can talk about that later, but none of them have been subjected to the kind of a study that leads the Food and Drug Administration to say, we authorize this drug for this condition. That's what an approved treatment is. But I think we're getting on the way to realizing both of those goals. Dr. Davis has just published a paper of a test, for instance, that in a small number of patients and healthy people to compare to, distinguish the people with ME/CFS from the healthy people perfectly. Would it be perfect in 100 people, in 1,000 people? Maybe not, but maybe close to perfect. So I think there are, and there are several other tests that might be on the verge of becoming real. So I'm encouraged. I think that the dreams that we've had for 40 years are closer to being realized today than at any time.
For what I just said before, I do have to say thank you to the Tannenbaums for everything that they've done in trying to move this forward, and for the communications and the, I don't want to say the education that you've provided for so many people in the way that you've provided, and I think that has made a huge difference. So I really do thank you. What I am seeing from all of this is that some of the internal medicine people, the internists, the primary care physicians, have now begun to understand this illness, and so they will give people, they will evaluate the patients, they will go ahead and acknowledge that the person has chronic fatigue and try to help them get the home health aid, the other supports at home, and so forth, which is an incredibly important role for the primary care physician. So this actually is happening, and so thank you for all you've done to move that forward and to make it happen.
Thank you. I second what both of you just said, and I think the biggest challenge for me is really to sit in the clinic room and look at the patient when they are asking, so where do we go from here and what do I do now? For me to say, I don't know. It's really hard as you were saying, as a physician, to not be able to provide an answer, an accurate answer or a definitive answer. And I'm really hopeful that with all these collaborative and all these connections that we are making through the Open Medicine Foundation, thanking Dr. Ron Tompkins of organizing this at Harvard and trying to make this happen, that we will get to have that biomarker, we will get to get that specific gold standard test, and we will move forward with clinical trials so that when you come to clinic, we can finally say, yes, I know exactly what to do and I know exactly what you have. And with that, I would like to open it up for questions from you guys, because we're here to answer any questions that you might have.
Hi, Dr. Komarov, I was just interested, you said you find there are some treatments you find helpful. We have a son with CFS, and we've tried some supplements and low-dose naltrexone, and just wondering if there's any particular supplements or medications that you've found that are helpful.
You're going to get your steps in today. I have never prescribed, well, twice or three times low-dose naltrexone, but I'm very impressed by my colleagues who currently are in practice who are using it, and what they say has been the positive response of most of their patients. Another supplement that many of my patients say has helped them is coenzyme Q10. And I think Dr. Kara also has used that treatment. The treatment that I have used the most over the years is very low doses of what are called tricyclic drugs. These are drugs that were introduced into medicine 70 years ago to treat depression, but at doses way higher than I'm talking about. What these drugs also do is give more people more time each night in deep sleep, restorative sleep. And I would say 85 to 90% of the hundreds of patients that I've treated with this say, it hasn't cured me, but I get a better sleep at night. I don't wake up as often, and in the morning I feel like I awaken feeling more energetic than I did before. And so that treatment, which has been studied in scientific randomized trials in a similar illness, fibromyalgia, and shown to be effective in that illness, in my clinical experience and that of colleagues, it has been effective with many people with chronic, with CFS. So those treatments, as well as non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs for people where pain is a really important part of the suffering, have been effective. That's sort of for openers.
We have another question.
Hello, thank you very much for the work you're doing to advocate for those of us who suffer from any CFS. I've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and I share many of the experiences that you talked about with it's all in your head, it doesn't exist, etc. And so it's wonderful to be acknowledged in this way. Thank you for the work you're doing. My question is, have any of you had any experience with cannabis?
Well, the short answer is no. Cannabidiol is being used increasingly around the country in those states where the medical uses of cannabis products are prescribed or allowed. It has a reputation as being quite good at pain relief when pain is an important part of the suffering. It has a less good reputation at improving the brain fog. But remember, these are anecdotal experiences. There has been no study of any cannabis product in this illness that I'm aware of.
Thank you. Until we have a medication that we can give you a prescription for, you can go to the pharmacy and you can feel better. What we can do is try to help you sleep better as best as possible and try to have pain control. And I think both of those things are extremely important in trying to, or helping someone move forward. Sleeping poorly, I think if we know it affects the immune system. When you do not sleep well, we know there is an impact on the immune system now. Your grandmother was right, get a good night's sleep. That's actually true. We know that the brain, when the brain does not sleep, that there are other cytokines and so forth that either are not given off or are given off that can be very detrimental. So I agree with Dr. Kamarov, getting a good night's sleep is fine. That's easier said than done for many people. I do send people to my colleagues in neurology in the sleep clinic to see if they can identify some particular abnormality. Some people have restless leg syndrome. Some people have sleep apnea. We do everything we can to try to improve their sleep. When all of that is done and all of that's normal, the tricyclics, a small dose of amitriptyline, has been very effective. Some of the patients feel better on Neurontin. Some people feel worse on Neurontin. Some people get groggy. So until, again, we can personalize medicine, a lot of this is a trial and error as to see who feels better on which medication. So the medicines we use for sleep are the amitriptyline, Neurontin, Cymbalta, which can also be helpful with pain. Some people do well on Savella, or even people who don't tolerate Neurontin might tolerate pregabalin or Lyrica. So it really becomes what works for which patient. Regarding pain is fatiguing. People who have CFS are tired to begin with this awful fatigue, but to have pain and to suffer from pain on top of it, that is exhausting in its own. And so I think doing what you can for pain control, and I'm not talking about narcotics or anything like that, but I am talking about, again, the medications we just talked about, which we didn't have, Tony, many years ago, that can give some people relief. Not everybody gets relief from it. I have used low-dose naltrexone, and now a number of patients have only started recently to use it. It has been very helpful in quite a number of people. Again, this is anecdotal. I don't have a head-to-head study, but some people seem to benefit from it. And for the people who could not get out of bed because of their pain, they're not able to run a marathon, and I'm not promising that, but they are able to get up and to do some minor activities around their home and to get out of the house. So for some people, it makes a difference, and I think it is worth trying unless there's a contraindication. As far as cannabis is concerned, again, I leave that to the patients. I don't have a license for medical marijuana. There are physicians that do. I tell my patient, if you're working with a physician that has their license and it's appropriate, you can try it. If it helps you and you can sleep better or you have less pain, that's fine. But again, it's all anecdotal.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think that we have much experience with cannabis or cannabinoids in ME/CFS specifically. I do see a lot of patients who have other symptoms from chronic diseases like GI dysmotility and nausea, vomiting, anxieties, and pains. They do try it, and in some it works, and some it doesn't. It's really a personal response. And as Donna said, I would encourage you to talk to a pain specialist who has a license to prescribe it and to try. Always start with the smallest dose possible, because you never know how your body would react, and then see if it works. In terms of other treatments, I think what has worked for the patients that I see is really knowing what the triggers are that would worsen the symptoms and try to avoid them at all costs. And I know that's not very easy to do, especially when the disease is starting and everything seems to be flaring the symptoms up, but keeping a diary, making sure to know, like, this day I did this, and for the next week I had really, really worse symptoms, and knowing what that trigger was is really helpful to eliminate. We have 2 more questions here.
Good afternoon. My name is Gisela Morales Barreto, and I'm a caregiver. And I have 2 questions, hopefully quickly, but for Dr. Kamarov. Some years ago, Mr. Hutchins, I believe, who is part owner of the Bruins that are so much in the news this week, he was in the process of giving some money to you or Brigham to open a clinic that was going to be seeing patients, and some nurse practitioner had already been hired, and suddenly the whole thing disappeared. And I was curious to know why that happened, because this is like probably, I would say 10 years ago or so. And the other question is, that you were part of the FDA committee that was in the process of approving Ampligen with hemispherics as a potential drug, not to cure it all, but with a subset of symptoms that would have helped, a bunch of people. There's some, as you so well know, individuals that are getting Ampligen in Nevada and has worked for them and they continue to get it. However, when the time came, for the approval of the drug, you voted against it, even though the FDA had said that it was not potentially going to cause any harm. And so I would like to know directly, now that I have the opportunity to see you face to face, why did you decide otherwise? Because I have it from experience for the person that I take care of, that she was a case, bookcase, poster child for Ampligen. And unfortunately, that has not been available. And as you probably know, the protocol has changed, and now it requires, a different way of giving the drug. So I just wanted to put those two things out there to see what your thoughts are. Thank you.
There was discussion about establishing at Harvard a center, both for clinical care of patients as well as research, dedicated to ME/CFS, and that was about 10 years ago. But it required a commitment for many years. You don't want a commitment to support such a thing for 2 years, but not beyond that, because then what happens 2 years to all of the people who have come to depend on the services? And there was difficulty in getting the kind of support needed to make a long-lasting commitment. That was why that didn't happen. The same people, however, did support a large study, not clinical care, but a study that was based out of the University of Miami at that time. The FDA panel that I was a part of was presented with data in open session. You can go back to the FDA recording of that meeting. I saw it. And there was evidence that of possible serious adverse effects from the drug that had not been accurately reported by the company seeking approval of the drug. And that gave me and other people sitting on the panel considerable pause, because it's unusual for the FDA to point out that some of the data that had been reported by the company was probably not accurate and possibly obscured evidence of serious side effects. So while I know many patients who have taken Ampligen and had a positive response to it, we're talking about a scientific process where large numbers of people are given either the real drug or a placebo, and all of their experiences, good and bad, are carefully recorded and analyzed. And in my judgment, at that meeting, that kind of careful presentation of credible evidence was not presented.
Well, thank you very much, Donna, Mel, and Tony. That was fantastic to hear from the clinicians, and it was a good opportunity for people to ask a few questions of their own.